Hi, I'm Gwen Frank. Thought I'd tell you a little bit about my background before showing you my studio here in Calgary. I'm from southern Saskatchewan in a rural area, and people say I started drawing when I was 2 years old. And I did a lot of drawing. I was youngest of 6. I spent a lot of time by myself developing my voice and just having a lot of fun. I didn't really benefit at all from art classes in high school because there weren't any. I was enrolled for 2 weeks in 1975 at the Saskatchewan Summer School of the Arts in a place called Fort San, which is near Fort Capel. Beautiful area, bit of an oasis in the hot, dry, rural prairie. Not too hot in January though. And I really got a taste for formal art training, and I just wanted more of it. So I enrolled at the Alberta College of Art in Calgary and had a really great 4 years there. I worked hard and earned my 4-year diploma with honors. Afterward, I studied at the University of Calgary in order to get my BFA. I had to take a few extra classes, a couple years more, and graduated with my BFA. And since then, I worked part-time at a few jobs, and I worked really hard in my studio and entered a lot of international juried and invitational exhibitions, many of which I got into and just helped to build my practice over the years. I was invited to take part in a workshop in Bratislava, Slovakia. It was the first International Print Symposium in Bratislava. It took place north of that city. And I spent a couple of weeks here and there in various international professional printmaking studios. The Centrum Frans Mazereel in Belgium, and there was one in southern France in the southwest. I find that one is always learning when exploring and showing up for the hard work in your studio for many years. And I've always tried to have fun with it, and it's printmaking can be quite frustrating but really rewarding too. I just have found so much enjoyment in it and continue to do it. So I highly recommend it as a chosen medium. And I've been able to refine my imagery, define my direction, gain some insight, which is really valuable in terms of learning about oneself and how one interprets the world. And now I would like to show you around my studio. All right, come down and see my etchings. Kind of a nice daylit space with collections everywhere. Here is my etching press and my ever-present inversion table. My back is full of pain most days. Good view of the outside. Lots of light. There's an early etching. I can show you that a little bit later. Good heat in here in the winter. A prep table. My inking space. Little book press to dry some small prints. This 10 test wall is where I dry my prints. I pin them up so they don't have any buckling. This is one of my later etchings. I'll come back to that. My hot plate. My etching inks. Some tools. And here are some prints, which I will show you later. This is a really handy old library storage system. It's great for storing small things. And a few pieces by artist friends. Linda Mercer, Sylvia Zeman, Kirsten Abrahamson. Lots of opportunities to trade artwork with lots of artists. A working drawing for one of my etchings. And this is where I do the etching of my copper plates. I have good ventilation. There's the pipe that goes out the side of the house. Very strong extraction fan. And in here, this is where I make my aquatints with airbrush. I just spray it evenly across my copper etching plate surface, and then I etch it in the acid baths here. Plenty of ventilation. And I just put the acid away into the bottle after I'm done, so it's not hanging around. Some storage. And this is where I blot my wet paper for printmaking. Here are lots of books. Here are some of the exhibition catalogs that I've partaken in over the years. Poland, Korea, China, Bulgaria, Boston, USA, lots of different places. Holland, Belgium. There's the main part of the printing area. So that was my Calgary studio. Hope you enjoyed that. I do have another studio in East Coulee, Alberta. It's where we have a little getaway place. It's just dipping down below the prairie there, and I like to do drawing and watercolor. It's quiet, it's got a good vibe, lots of birds, and fresh air. Let's go. Welcome to my studio in East Coulee. It was renovated in about, 10 years ago. It used to be the old post office in this little hamlet, and now it's repurposed for a dry studio for me. Let's go in. I have plenty of table space, good circulation of air. That door opens, and the door we just came through. And I'm very fond of birds. It's a very bird-rich area here in this hamlet. My drawing desk. Some preparation desks and more drawing. East Coulee is about 18 kilometers southwest of Drumheller. So it's not at all isolated, and it's very quiet. Here are some postcards of works that I've done here in this studio, small reproductions, some of the pieces I've done in my Calgary studio. And a piece made by one of my grandsons, Jude, and he's much older now, but I love that pure drawing. And here's another tiny room where the post office employees used to sort all the mail. I generally use it to store art supplies, watercolor, and a few other things. Now, I have a bad back, so I have to stop working and do a little inverting on my inversion table. It does seem to help a little. All right. So there you have it. It's very well insulated and quite peaceful, and it has a good vibe to work to. Of course, it being originally an post office, one must have the queen present at all times. And here's a little piece that my husband Michael made from a found piece of wood. Oh, I love it. Okay. I'll see you later, East Coulee. Well, here we are back in Calgary. I thought I'd start showing you some of my artwork. This little etching is about 7 inches tall. It's named Fable, and I made it for the Alberta Printmakers 30th anniversary portfolio. The theme was futurology, anything to do with future, whether it be hopeful, probable, possible, trying to keep it on a positive note. I was motivated by the complete unknowability of what is to come, really, and by the seemingly small part that life here on Earth plays in the whole of the expanding cosmos. It's simply about the grace of mystery and about life's bold desire to navigate mystery. I've always been really fascinated by corvid creatures. A little bit of a star map in behind him. It's a little bit of a pathfinder, this animal. And now here are some steps in order to achieve this etching. The beginning portion is the first bare bones of the darkest part of the design, and that's my first proof. So this is called state 1 of the etching, called Fable. And then I began to add some tones. So I'll show you my plate. I'll go over here to the press bed where I had placed my copper etching plate. It's actually made from a shaped piece of copper, just like you would use for the roof of a building. I polished it up so it's shiny. And I coated the surface of it with an acid resist and made the lines, the very faint lines in the background, with a process called soft ground line etching. And several other techniques named aquatint gives you a real fine series of grooves and pits. If you used your fingernail, you could hear the scratches. This is very smooth, and this is very rough. So the pits and grooves that I have had acid eat into the plate in these areas, they're deepest, and they will hold more ink. So that's the plate placed on its portion of the press bed. And so when it's inked and printed, the tone appeared first like that. And then I added a bit of color, and I did some corrections. You see a difference between this portion of his lower neck and this portion. I lightened it up quite a bit. And you can see how the head is a little bit lighter, the top part of the head. To give it more of a 3D, this one is more flat, and this one is a little bit more 3D up here. And also a little bit here. So by the time I came to the point where I would really like to start editioning my etching plate, it was pretty much where I had wanted it, tone-wise. Now there are a couple of ways in which you can change a tone of an aquatint, and the aquatint is the toned portion of the drawing up here. One of them is to start out with a test plate, and I do that quite regularly when I start my etchings. I have a piece of copper here that looks shiny like that, and I'll make a test run in the acid to see how long I should keep it in the acid. So that's just a short period, 20 seconds, and then I doubled it and I added more time until the acid bit quite deeply into the plate. So this is very rough and deep. This is shiny and smooth, where the acid hasn't really touched it much at all. So that's how I know where my tones are. I do a lot of pre-planning. And if I quote-unquote make a mistake by over-etching something and making it too dark, say how the top of the head used to be, I'll just use this as an old test plate. I will actually take my scraper, it's a 3-sided, very sharp tool, and knock down some of the, oh dear, it's kind of hard. Knock down some of the roughness. So I'm actually scraping off the surface of the plate. See, that mark will print lighter because it will hold less ink during printing. So that's how I can lighten up areas. And so this is really, the scraper is called the Etcher's eraser, and it comes in various sizes. Here's a nice fat one. And by the same token, if you don't have enough darkness, say I wanted to make the eye appear a little darker around the edge, I could physically go right onto the plate with a very, very sharp, this is an old dentist tool, and just make pock marks. But ideally they should be you'd have to put some elbow grease into it and dig deeper to give you a little bit darker area. So there's a note about corrections there. And here's another note about test plates, as far as I use them. You can see that there is a series of line here. And the darker portion of the line represents a longer time in the acid. So I would have coated this plate with a very thin acid-resistant material, and it would remain sticky. And I take a piece of tracing paper, lay it over top of the sticky ground, and draw through that tracing paper with a pencil. And wherever the pencil touched the tracing paper, and you peel the tracing paper off, that sticky ground comes off wherever your pencil touched it. So you can take that to the acid bath, and the acid will eat into the copper. It'll consume the little bits of metal that are exposed by peeling it away. And so the acid will bite little pits and grooves that are deep below the surface of the plate. So this area would be very lightly etched. You can almost not see it. And this portion gets darker, 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 longer time in the acid. And now this portion is where I talk about tone and the process of aquatint. Instead of coating the entire surface of the plate with a sticky, thin layer of acid-resistant material called soft ground, I actually sprayed the entire copper plate with very fine drops of acid resistance, very similar to the coating that I painted on here or rolled on here. I'm actually spraying little droplets of it all over the surface, and the droplets protect the plate only in those tiny spots. And so when you put the plate in the acid for, say, 20 seconds, the acid will bite in between the tiny little spots of acid resist. So you're getting mountaintops of acid resist, that waxy spots, and you get valleys where the acid has eaten in between. It's so small you can't see it here. But I would have protected the plate with by painting on some acid resistant liquid called hard ground after my 20 seconds in the acid. And then I would carry on. I would give it another 20 seconds in the acid. So you're supposed to be getting a little bit darker gray, a little bit darker tone, a little deeper valleys in between the mountaintops. Adding more time, so you protect that, add more time, and protect this, add more time, protect this. And when I say add more time, I mean a little bit longer time in the acid. You take it out, you dry it off, and you protect another stage so that you get a gradation of white, which is shiny here, all the way down to a really nice velvety black. And I'll show you that in printed form. So here is the plate, and here is the print, and all my notes as to how long it was in the acid. So there's the white portion, and it just steps down into deeper pits in the plate, which hold a lot more ink when you spread it over the surface of the plate. And when you spread it over the surface of the plate, it gets right down into every groove. And I use, it's actually wetting tool. It's what bridal veils are made of. And this is covered in ink, imagine. And I just circle wipe the plate with this veil material, and it comes off onto the pad. And I keep doing that until all the ink is off of the surface of the plate with cleaner and cleaner pieces of wetting tool. And so the only ink that's left is what's deepest inside the lines that you have etched with acid or scratched in, or various other methods of getting pits and grooves. And really that's the name of this particular printmaking form is intaglio. It's the Italian word for incisement or groove. And you're creating incisions and grooves and pits to hold ink. So that's the very basic form of what I'm doing with my artwork. Now I'll show you a few more. And here is an exhibition that I was part of, invited to be part of about 5 years ago, 60 times 60, The Wandering Mind. It was arranged by a gallery in Antwerp and also Bratislava. 60 artists were invited from around the world to produce 60 images on a CD-sized copper etching plate. Now, yeah, that is copper, and everyone had the same format. I created my image on the copper in order to withstand 60 impressions under the pressure of my etching press. I had to get it steel-faced. So it was put into an electrically charged bath where steel molecules adhere to the copper surface, and it makes it a lot more durable, and it can withstand quite a lot more printing. So this was the first, oh no, this is actually the third. I couldn't find the first state of this etching. So we're on number 3. I just printed it in black so I could see what information I had on the surface of the plate. And I wanted it to be of a subtle color, and I find that this color is a little bit too much for what I had wanted. This is called Inkling. And I added transparent base to the color, so it sort of receded into the background again, so I had to coax it up again. So it's a little bit subtle, but you can see just barely there. I like subtle color on my prints. So here's the plate and the print in one spot. This is a small aquatint named Solstice. I was interested in capturing a moment between leaping and landing, something a bit poetic and not specific in its narrative, but something that evokes a certain feeling. I initially wiped it all in black, and then I added color at the end of the wiping with just tapping my finger on a certain color onto the jacket and a different color on the hat. And that was a little technique that I learned from the Slovak printmakers. And here is Solstice's first and second states. The first one where I wiped the entire plate in black just to see what I had as information from the metal itself. And through that process, that can really help me in planning the next step, which was reducing some of the shadow area and also applying some color with a special finger tapping method after wiping the whole plate in black and cleaning it off, and then just touching the areas where the jacket and the hat were. Makes for a nice subtle effect. The inspiration for this came from some friends who we were visiting in Edmonton, and the dad had tossed his boy into the snow. It just somehow sat with me, and I felt I had to do something with the joy and, you know, adding a little twist to it I like to do. And so here's the second state in comparison with the current print. I made a little bit more detail in the trees, as you can see. And just generally lighten things up a little. This piece is called Flow. It's made entirely of tone. There's no line, even though it appears there's a bit of line. The tone is making up the drawing. And it's kind of unusual for me to source dreams. This one, as I was waking up one day, I was filled with this enormous sense of peace, and a half-sphere tree was growing out of a calm body of water, and it just was so inviting, really peaceful. Instead of the calm body of water, I decided to replace it with a river, which is quite indicative of life itself. Everything changing, constantly on the run. But there's still this feeling of perseverance in the face of change. This one is named Bittersweet Tale, and it's a bit about life itself, the yin and the yang of it, where everything cannot exist except by, you know, as accompanied by its opposite. So in the mid-2000s, I was invited to go to France in the southwest portion in a small town called Coulee near the city of Toulouse. I was invited to take part in a group of artists in a historical building to set up our artwork materials and draw and paint and give an exhibition and a talk to the people who lived there. And this is one of the images that I created in a beautiful dry countryside setting. A few of the artists and I would go roaming the hills, a great big open hilly country with evidence of many centuries of shepherds tending their, whether it be sheep or cattle. And I sat down in an area that used to be an old pasture, and one dead tree really stood out and contrasted itself with just a super lush growth that surrounded us. We're really quite fascinated by it. So here's a little example of the lushness as a contrast. So I made this with 2 plates, one of them carrying the color and the other carrying the black portion of the drawing. So the color is pretty subtle at the top in the sky. And you see a bit of a yin and yang symbol. Just a little bit about, being okay with how life presents itself to us. It's a bit hard to film, but because it's so shiny, but I thought I would show you the plates from which I took this print. There's the color one, where I would have spread the greens as a painting, really. I would spread the ink there and wipe it off. It would subtly blend together, and just a very fine tone. And here is the black portion. I'll give you a bit more detail. I guess you could consider what I do very closely related to jewelry. The design on the surface of the plate is quite shallow. Even though you can feel it and hear it, it's still quite shallow on top of the surface of the plate. But it does hold enough ink to print an image. And this is Bittersweet Tale. This etching in aquatint is a little bit more about my roots on the prairie. I was invited along with about 8 other print artists and a poet to create prints for a portfolio called the Prairie Music Suite. And it was organized by David Faber of Wake Forest University's printmaking department. And among the invited people were Derek Bezant, Jim Westergaard of Red Deer, Warrington Colescott, Karen Kuntz, David Faber himself. I hope I don't forget anyone. Robert Hedin was the poet. And it was quite loosely based on prairie sensibility. I called this one Thunder, and it's part of a twosome which went inside the portfolio case. I'll give you a bit of a close-up. So this was made with 2 plates. I made it at a time where we were just selling our old house and getting away from my old studio in northwest Calgary, and we had not timed it quite right, and I was without a studio to finish this project. So my good friend Linda Mercer of High River at the time invited me to come and work in her studio, and I created these plates in about a month. Serendipity. In this one I've created quite a few textures with soft ground texturing. You know, that sticky material I would put over the surface of the plate. What you can do is wait till that dries. It still remains sticky, and I put down a piece of fabric that created this pattern. Put the fabric down, you run it through the press, peel off the fabric, and it takes away the ground in that particular area. And then you can put the plate into your acid, and the acid will bite, kind of photographically almost, in that place where the fabric peeled away the ground. Imagine two individuals or two worlds coming together, previously unknown to each other. And there's not necessarily any common ground between the two worlds. But I was really interested in the idea of potential, the strong possibilities that could exist as these two worlds or individuals share information, get to know each other, form a little bit of a subset. I don't know, the poetry of the idea just really appealed to me. I'll give you some detail. This is one of my most involved aquatint sizes. It was a lot of work, a lot of love went into it. It was all done on one plate with all the colors being applied to that one plate. No line at all. So that's pure aquatint. And the name of this piece is called Reunion 1. This etching in aquatint is called chain. I really like handling texture and pattern. So I gave it my all in a formal sense. This one is made from two plates, one for the color and one for the black, key part of the drawing. And it was quite a lot of work to ink and print. You have to ink the plate every single time you take an impression from it on your etching press. So this one took me about 45 minutes to ink. Yeah, it took a while to print 30 of these in my small edition. I'll show you a little bit of the texture. Not sure you've ever wanted to see crunchies soaking in milk that close up. And I was quite happy to be informed that chain made it into this American publication of the best of printmaking, an international collection. That would have been the late 90s. There it is. In 2007, I was asked to take part in a project with the Gallery Éprouve Artiste in Antwerp, Belgium. And the theme was about, just loosely based on the idea of cats. So here's my piece that I produced. It's called Lair. And like the last one I showed you called Chain, I really am attracted to the texture and the formal aspects of it and cats in general. My sister had quite a few cats on her acreage, and I would go out there to shoot some photographs of their many cats during feeding or whatever for inspiration. And this is one of her cats. And some of my collection of tin toys, my husband and mine. A Mexican tin toy sort of hangs. This is a one color etching. Actually, I should say one plate. And then I've added extra color onto it with careful wiping. This is about 4 by 6 inches. So a fair amount of detail. And another small European project that I was participating in the mid-90s saw me working with a group of about 8 or so different print artists. We worked on intaglio printmaking. And here's a photo of our group. There were some people from Switzerland, Ukraine, Greece, Slovakia, and the Czech Republic. This is the piece that I did for it. But it's an etching and aquatint. You can see some line in there. And I used Michael, my husband, for a bit of the subject matter. Imagine if an abandoned prairie home were floating away on water with someone attached, sleeping. This piece is entitled From A to B. I used my dad as part of the subject. A little bit about when you get out from the norm, your sensibility can shift. Things don't seem quite normal, and new possibilities, new creative possibilities can happen. And this is a 2-plate etching where there's a key black plate. Yeah, I think my dad was all right with modeling for me. That was his couch, his and Mum's. The power of a stormy prairie sky has no end. The order of the images that I'm showing you are going from the most recent back in time. So this one is called Bird's Eye View. Kind of about waiting, watching. To me, facing the direction west always has a feeling of looking to the future. It's also a view from our house. Maybe not the tree, but certainly the mountains, the Rocky Mountains. And this is a 2-plate etching and aquatint, because the etching part refers to the line and the aquatint part refers to the tone. Bird's eye view. And now for something completely different. This is a watercolor that was used for an LP cover, a CD cover as well. My husband, Michael Dangelmeyer, he's a Calgary designer. He used this watercolor for the cover of our musician friend Harry Manx's new album. And it features the music of Steve Mariner as well. Mike often does work with Holger Peterson of Stony Plain Records on such CD or LP projects. I thought that was pretty neat. I'll show you the original watercolor. Here is my original watercolor entitled Local Motive. And I actually made it as answer to an invitation to be included in a touring exhibition put on by Trex, the Alberta Gallery of Art. Had invited a number of printmakers and painters, different artists, to do a touring exhibition across Alberta. For 5 years, this watercolor toured. And my idea about this image really had to do with the function of certain kinds of energy. We all know religious energies have been changing over the years, and certainly coal mining, this takes place, this imagery came from our other place outside of Calgary, East Coulee area. So I did a little bit of walking around Wayne and East Coulee and all the towns there, Cambria, and came up with various elements to put this together. And of course, the energy transfer of the railway systems has really changed, especially in the Dinosaur Valley. But I just had a little bit of fun with it. Yeah, locomotive. I'm always interested in things happening on the fringe of focus. What looks like an ordinary windbreak, a planting of many trees closely together to prevent the erosion of the soil from the wind. Sometimes things just seem more alive than they actually are. Well, who knows? Maybe they are. This is called standing ground. Persevering in the face of the power of the wind. This one was an interesting one to make. I etched all this area very deeply so that I could get the darkness that I liked. But it turned out that it looked so dark that I almost gave up. And then I added a little bit of transparent base to my ink, and all the detail came up again. I was sure relieved. I believe that there is beauty and opportunity in every single atom of existence. I think it's probably important to pay attention, listen closely to any invitation to enter into difficult territory. I think it'll bring you closer to who you really are. This piece is called Invitation. Here's a piece I made in Piešťany nad Váhom, which is near Bratislava, in the mid-90s when I was invited to take part in the first graphic symposium. It was a really good opportunity because I was out of my element. I didn't know quite how to etch with copper yet, but they had a system where it was copper only and you used the acid that they provided. We hauled a great big etching press up in a couple of flights of stairs to use. It was a lot of fun and I learned so much, especially with my printing technique. Here's an example of the fine tapping in of color after you wipe your entire plate in black. And then with my finger I would tap onto a little circle of yellow ink and then apply it directly to the plate, especially where the doorway is and the seat. This is called Inner Weather, and it's part of my idea of growing up on the prairie. You have so much wide open space, lots of space for the imagination to fly in. Sometimes it compels a person to move inward and do a little exploring on the inside. So that's why I like to play with windows and doorways a lot, moving through, in and out of places where one can question and ask and just be. Down below our house in northwest Calgary, toward the Bow River, there are train tracks. I really enjoy the sound of the train moving by many times during the day. And I thought I could say something about the perseverance of nature. The ubiquitous prairie crocus, how it has survived so many centuries up in these wonderful hills of the Bow River Valley, which I consider to be kind of prairie based where we are right now at this portion of the river. So there are some train tracks that I stood on and began drawing this spot. And I was stopped by a police officer making sure that I knew enough to get off the tracks if a train came. I'm so glad that he was caring about my welfare, and yeah, I did get off when a train came. I live to create more prints. This piece is Depth of Field. It's a little bit about travel, and going far afield, you end up coming close to yourself. This is taken from a drawing I made in Holland, in the north part of Holland, on an island called Ameland. I was really interested in the textures and also in studying Dutch printmaking, especially the Dutch genre printmaking of the mid-1500s. I'll get to that in a little bit. Here's some detail. Someone looking through a pair of field glasses. I was in the habit of sending my slides of my artwork around to various publishing companies, and I was really pleased to get onto this North American art supply catalog. Daniel Smith used to supply all sorts of printmaking materials, inks, tools, you name it, and I was really quite smitten with their array of what they had. Every time we would go to Seattle, I would always pop in and spend an hour there just feeling all the fabulous materials and having a good time imagining what images I'd be making. Oh yes, and then there is winter in Canada. Certainly on the prairie at -40 it's kind of uncomfortable, but thankfully we have an umbilical in the form of a jump cable. I had an idea for this image, and I got on top of the deck of our old house in northwest Calgary and asked a neighbor to drive his half-ton down below our deck so that I could photograph it from above, so I could draw from it more accurately. And I don't know a lot about what goes on underneath the hood of a vehicle, but it should be all there. I don't know. I really enjoy the feeling of coming in from the cold. It makes me feel alive. And the title is Umbilical. The further back in time this artwork goes, the more documentary or narrative my work was. This is a 2-plate etching in aquatint, and just a selection of colors, nothing overwhelming. This is part of my earliest memories as a kid of coming along with the family to farm auctions and estate auctions. Always the group of farmers in the background. You can tell that they're connecting really, really well together when they're all looking at the ground, shuffling their feet. Really good memories. My dad is depicted in there, not literally, but there was always somebody picking up fabulous things and collecting them. He used to collect very voraciously, so I've inherited that too. And here's a little bit of the detail. The auctioneer, local ladies, local guys. There's just so many fascinating items, textures, histories, story, and everything. So that's called collectibles. Hi there. Here's my portfolio of full of 3 prints called the Corner Suite. And it's a nice tradition where people of high society would get together in the drawing room with cigars and brandies and view the folio of etchings. I'll show you some details a bit later after I unveil. Here is a fly sheet with a story that this whole suite of 3 etchings centers around. There was an abandoned farm near where I grew up, and it was always abandoned as far as I can remember. And we used to visit it quite a lot because it was strange. No one lived there. And the reason why it's called the Corner Suite is the name of the place was Wallowine's Corner. It was an area where an early family named with the surname Wallowine had lived. And so the portfolio idea, being quite traditional, is also, it's alive and well. Colin Bate Books made this portfolio for me. He happened to live right next door to us in Silver Springs in northwest Calgary. So we had a friendship, and he offered to make me 35 portfolios, and I have 35 sets of these 3 prints. I'll show you some details. So the fly sheet, as you open the portfolio, shows 3 stories, one for each of the prints that lie therein. And they're just a little memory for me about what kinds of things happened around that spot. So the story itself isn't really all that important. I think the imagery takes care of the story itself. But I really loved to, with these words, create a kind of a pattern all the way around the image. You'll see. So here's the first of the 3 prints. This one is called Wallowine's Corner. It's about the actual house and alkali slough and all the weeds growing around there, and the fact that I learned how to drive with my friend Shelley Lightbody and driving their junky old cars around these dirt roads was just fantastic. Here's some detail and some of the decoration provided by the story itself. There were even old vehicles being dumped into the slough. That whole area is gone now. The house was burnt down. But serves for an interesting memory. And this is the second of the 3 prints. I titled it Itchy McGitchy Magoo, and that is a name of the tree that we gave as children to this tree that grew solo out on the prairie. There wasn't a tree around for a long way. But we'd drive past it, picking berries, other activities, and it seemed kind of creepy, so we named it to give it less power than it would have otherwise. And this one is the middle image. It's called Peck. My brother had caught a crow. It was squawking, and I came in close to look at it. I was about 4.5, 5, and it pecked my nose. I'm not afraid of crows now. which is kind of surprising, but it stood out in my mind. And this one is a fairly large etching and aquatint called Hockey Night in Canada, drawn completely from my memory. There'd be the female contingent traditionally in the kitchen. My 5 sisters, I should say 4 sisters, I count myself as a sister, helping Mom out there in the kitchen washing up. I don't know, I'm just reflecting what happened, not exactly what should be happening. And not a real depiction of my father and my brother, but they were certainly in there watching hockey when everything else was going on in the house. And very fortunately, there was a couple of writers, academics, Richard Grunow and Dave Whitson. They wrote a book, Hockey Night in Canada, about gender issues in the sport. And I was pretty pleased that they asked me for permission to use my work on their cover. Some of you might remember back in 1988, Calgary received its first pair of pandas from China, and our zoo was thrilled, as were we. But always seeing things from the perspective of the prairie, naturally, at that time, I thought I'd have a little bit of fun with it. The title of this one is When in Rome. And this is one of the few prints that I have made applying color strictly with watercolor after everything was printed and dried. Sometimes one's simplest ideas can really be the best. There's something about this piece that goes right to my core. I called it Silent Night. And it is definitely prairie-based. Sometimes it's so beautiful out there, no matter where you are. You just have to get out in it. This piece is an example of the strange things that can happen to you as a child that really weren't all that strange, but they live forever in your mind that way. I titled this one Prairie Mobile Home, and our home that my dad put a successful bid in, a farm 5 miles away, it was successful, and it moved to our house on flatbed truck. I was about 3.5 at the time, and it had to break through one of our caragana hedges. It was just all so mysterious. Wasn't quite sure what was happening, but I was excited, and I did really get into the new digs. But it's certainly part of that whole idea of what if. That's Prairie Mobile Home. And now I'm getting close to my earliest days of art making in a formal sense. This was actually an exercise that was prescribed by Gary Olson, my long-term teacher of etching. Bless him. He was absolutely wonderful. And he always said, just keep working hard, keep putting your name and your work out there, and things will happen. But if you don't do anything like that, if you just wait for things to come to you, they just won't do it. They won't come, and you're stuck with a lot of artwork. Besides, getting accepted into juried exhibitions is a really big shot in the arm. It's very encouraging, and it helps to fuel your art making. So this was kind of a culmination of all of the techniques we learned in his class in that 1 year. So you've got hard ground line, soft ground texture, aquatint. I think that's about it. But the imagery it comes from the fact, in part, that my grandmother had 15 babies and my dad is still alive. He is 95. And I thought, wow, that's quite a feat to raise that many children with my grandfather. And so this one is called Christening Day, Getting Them Done. And so part of that series, which consists of about 10 images, what I call the baby series, this one is called Wash Day. I've employed a little bit of aquatint here and hard ground line. So there's the dirty pile and the clean pile that stretches out past the image. Another one from the baby series called Hanging Them Out. This one is indicative of the time that I won a printmaking scholarship in my second year, and I could go anywhere, do anything with the $1,000, which was quite the sum back in the day, as long as it had something to do with printmaking. So I went to the professional print shop called Graph in Montreal, in the French part near Parc La Fontaine, and exploring that city was just phenomenal for me. I really have an affinity for architecture and the feelings that architecture evokes. So I thought I would work it into my image. And this one was a couple of years later. I was working toward my first solo exhibition at the Moutart Art Gallery in downtown Calgary in 1985. So this is called Havoc in the Buttery. It's part of that baby series. Caught in the act. I really did have a lot of fun with drawing and printmaking. And we had a cold room in our old farmhouse in Saskatchewan. Thought I had to definitely bring that into my work at some point. You never know what's happening when you hear thumps and bumps behind that door. Really enjoyed sharing this with you. Thanks for watching.